remain open to the unknown, to what might be possible in your life, that there might be growth that you're not aware of, or some sort of struggle that you're going through right now has a bigger purpose and will actually help you elevate to another level in life, so to speak. I really encourage embracing a mindset that invites exploration and understanding beyond the tangible. Hey there, seekers. Before we get into today's episode, I've got a small favor that could make a huge difference. If you find value here and think others could benefit too, the best way to help spread the word is to scroll down and leave us a quick review, whether you're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. It only takes a moment and it helps us reach more people striving to unlock their potential. Plus, you might even get some good karma. Welcome to The Self You Seek, a podcast dedicated to helping you unlock your fullest potential through self-actualization, mental optimization, and transformative experiences. I'm Dr. Brendan Doherty, a traditionally trained psychiatrist who has come to realize that while psychiatry offers powerful tools, there's often something more needed to help people truly thrive. In this podcast, we'll explore evidence-based approaches alongside ancient wisdom and modern transformative experiences that push beyond the boundaries of conventional mental health care. Whether grounded in science or supported by compelling anecdotal evidence, these insights and discussions are all worthy of exploration. Join me as we navigate the path towards unlocking your potential and transforming your well-being. And a quick reminder, this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not substitute for personalized medical advice. Always consult with a licensed healthcare or mental health professional if you're uncertain or need guidance. This podcast also does not represent the views of any business or health service I'm associated with. And now for the show. Okay, welcome to this next episode of The Self You Seek. It's a pleasure to be here. Today is a solo episode, and we're going to be talking about mental health and life optimization and exactly what is the difference. Are they the same? What are the differences? What are the similarities? It's not clear-cut. So let's get into it. And yeah, I guess this was partly inspired by an article I recently read on what's called Cosmetic Psychiatry. And it's an interesting topic. I didn't really like the name Cosmetic Psychiatry because it's really talking about something superficial, whereas traditional psychiatry is really being about treating mental illness. Cosmetic psychiatry was talking about really superficial enhancements and comparing it to, say, cosmetic surgery. Now, there are plenty of good arguments for cosmetic surgery, and I'm not saying that it's wrong, but also when it comes to cosmetic psychiatry and just talking about superficial enhancements, as if all people want to do is to be able to think more clearly or have a greater power of memory or working memory or processing speed, where really enhancement in the world of the brain or mental health is much deeper than that. So it was inspired by that and just thinking about what is mental health and what is the domain of psychiatry or people that practice in mental health, and what is the domain and is there space for these same people and people to think of mental health in a broader term than just fixing mental illness. And of course, mental health is more than just fixing mental illness, but yeah, we'll talk about some of the nuances of that. So what is mental health then? It's a state of well-being where individuals cope with normal stresses, work productively, and contribute to their communities. That's the typical definition as described by the World Health Organization and other organizations. So it's not just the absence of illness, and it really focuses on being a functional human. And when you have a look at what the definitions of mental illness are, they really focus on functioning per se. So everyone has times where they feel depressed or times where they're not thinking clearly or times where they're a bit manic. But is that really impacting on your functioning? And at some point, these things become so much that they impact on your functioning. And that's really where something turns into an illness. So is mental health just simply about being functioning? Well, I don't think so. Mental health is much broader than that. I recently asked on social media, what is mental health? And the number of answers was really quite diverse. It really wasn't much about illness. There were some people that said, it's a lack of trauma or dealing with trauma, but it was also much more about resiliency, flexibility, reaching one's life purpose, etc. So it really was an individual response to that. So, it's about thriving and empowerment and bouncing back when times are not so good. I feel like that's a much broader definition and better for psychiatry and psychologists to actually incorporate these things instead of just focusing on the illness or the lack of functioning part. I think we can do better. Now, this focusing on disease states isn't without good reason, however, because psychiatry in itself is based on the medical model, which has really been focusing on illness and treating illness to alleviate suffering. So it's really about helping people that are at some of the worst times in their life bounce back from that and become functioning humans again in society. And as that definition said, function in community. So I think it is a valuable approach and it's steeped in a tradition which is important. However, it does have limitations. And I think that emphasizing pathology and crisis intervention over holistic well-being and raising to a higher bar is a serious limitation. The other thing is that if we're going to focus on treating mental health conditions like depression or anxiety disorder or ADHD or schizophrenia or whatever it is, it's troubled because over time, the definition of what is a mental illness has actually changed. And actually exemplified, the most extreme example is that until the 1970s, homosexuality was considered a disease state. And of course, we would never say that these days, but what conditions are we saying that are diseases today in another 20 years will not necessarily be considered disease? So the goalposts are shifting. And we haven't actually been able to state what is a condition. So if we say someone has depression, that doesn't actually have construct validity. And by that, I mean it's the extent to which a diagnostic label accurately reflects the underlying condition. And so in the example of depression is really just a collection of symptoms. So you're feeling depressed or not feeling like you have joy in life or can feel happiness, as well as other symptoms. But in reality, we don't know where that's come from. So it's not something that just applies to people who have suffered from trauma. It doesn't apply to, say, people that have it as a genetic tendency. It doesn't just apply to people who have gone through significant life stresses. So it all comes from different places, and we don't actually have a test that can tell us one way or the other whether someone is truly depressed, and we don't understand exactly what's going on in the brain in terms of the chemical underpinnings of it. So there's no test, there's no brain scan, there's no blood test, there's no set test where we can accurately just say, this is depression. We are just simply collecting a bunch of symptoms and calling it depression. Now, there's a reason for that because we needed to group them together. And at some stage, researchers were like, we need to call depression something. So we did that. This was in the 80s, so that researchers could actually lump these things together and accurately say, okay, this is depression. We give someone with depression this kind of treatment, and then we see if it works. Because if we didn't do that, then we'd just be stabbing in the dark about what depression is. But at least if we agree on a definition, then research can further. But the limitation is that we don't actually know the underlying cause of depression. In reality, it's probably a multitude of causes and potentially a multitude of things that would be different types of depression that we may eventually understand. Anyway, I digress. Let's talk about life optimization and what that actually means. So at present, life optimization is really thought of as the pursuit of personal growth, fulfillment, and alignment with one's highest potential beyond mere functionality. So it really goes much beyond disease states. Now, I think it includes that, of course. You can't optimize your life if you're in the midst of a mental health, a deep mental health condition, or maybe you can optimize it, but when it's not being treated properly, you're not going to be able to do too much. So basic mental health centers on really maintaining that functionality, but optimization is really more about self-actualization and reaching new levels of well-being. Now, that means something different for everyone. And this is where it becomes tricky because while we have set definitions for what mental illness is, we don't really have a set definition for what one's own idea of optimization is. So for one person, it may be living their purpose or their highest connection to the world, or their best, be a best community or family member, or do something like being a great sports person or a great thinker, or transcend current levels of consciousness as we know them. The idea of what's one's self-actualization is actually a really personal thing. And that's why defining this is quite tricky. Even the idea of finding purpose is a personal thing. Some people choose not to find purpose and they're happy with really being exactly in the present moment. So they might even prioritize stability or connection with someone as it is, or freedom or community, and not necessarily want to find the purpose, but simply to live life as it comes to them. That is a very profoundly personal goal. Personally, I found that freedom is a really important part of my life optimization or enhancement. As many people do, they go to primary school and then high school because they're told to. It's what their parents and society wants them to do. And then for me, I decided that I want to go to medical school because I thought it would be a good job. It might be interesting. It's going to pay well. I'm going to get to do interesting work. I'm going to get a front seat in life. But really, there was an element of society was really guiding me towards that because it was society's idea of what a good job or what a good life is. And as I got into it, I could see that it wasn't as simple and that actually there's many downsides to being a doctor, despite it being a wonderful job all in all. And even when I became a doctor, then I needed to choose a pathway within being a doctor, which eventually was psychiatry. And becoming a psychiatrist, you really have to stay within the medical model and do what they tell you to do in being a psychiatrist. So it's a profession, a vocation, one that society has really formed. And there are good reasons for that, as I've described. There are regulations, it's important to practice in an ethical way and within the bounds of what evidence shows. And that's really the basis of psychiatry. But there's an element really of me doing what the world wants to do. And even though I had choice in that decision, I wasn't aware of the restrictions, or perhaps I wasn't really able to think more outside the box until I finished that and had more freedom. So as I've mentioned in a previous podcast, that really there is this idea that before you're 40, you kind of do what the world wants of you. And then at some stage, you start to do what your own psyche wants of you. And that's really a life task. And that arguably is one thing that is part of defining your own life optimization. Now, you can do that at any age. I just happen to be about to turn 40, so it's a very relevant statement for me. I think that was by James Hollis. I say this to exemplify my own life, that I've had to find freedom in the way I think and what I do. And so I choose to practice as a psychiatrist, but I also choose to do alternative things that broaden my mind in other ways, such as this podcast or writing or exploring different cultures and communities. Now, I'd like to address the idea of spirituality in the search for meaning, because that certainly is an important part of many people's life optimization and goes beyond the typical sense of what we talk about in mental health. I do remember that one of the key underlying concepts in how we assess mental health, we talk about the biopsychosocial model, which is really something by a guy called George Engel. But I remember first becoming aware of an extension of that, which is the biopsychosocial spiritual model, which was, I think, coined in the terms of, became more popular in palliative care. So when people come towards the end of their life, they're not just after biological improvement or homeostasis and psychological and social well-being. They also have this sense for what if there's something more. So you add in the spiritual, and that becomes more important as people get older and want to have that sense of, is there something else in life? Now, typically, that hole has been filled by religion or other practices, but I think people also now are defining their own vision of what spirituality is because they have more freedom to think about it. There are common themes such as feeling connected to something greater or experiencing an out-of-body perspective. And this often happens in, say, near-death experiences, psychedelic experiences, or deep meditative practices. So there are these things that have commonalities in certain spiritual practices. But the idea of spirituality really comes down to there being something greater than ourselves, or something greater than what we can actually understand in the rational world as we see it. Now, we may be able to understand what this is at some stage in our development, and perhaps we will understand that as a species. And there are some ideas, as I've discussed in this podcast before with some of the guests, that this perhaps lies within all of us. For example, those same equations that determine the rules of the universe that physics has explained also exist within us, and we may have access to some sort of greater knowledge or intelligence without even realizing it. But at the moment, we don't 100% know what spirituality is, so it does involve a degree of faith or suspicion that there is something bigger out there, and then attempting to access that somehow. And that becomes really important for people because they want to know that there is something bigger. So it's certainly become a bigger role in my life. I come from a very rational, logical background. And for a long time, it was certainly quite tricky to even accept that there was something bigger. We get taught science in schools. And if you come from a family that has a agnostic or atheist background, it takes a while to accept that maybe there is something bigger. But there are clues, of course, even if you're very rational, that there is something out there that we can't see. As I said, these kind of experiences that people have where they're out of body will happen to some people, and that can be a trigger to think that there is something bigger or some sort of force or energy that we understand that is bigger than what we can see. And when we feel that we know, for instance, that there are, magnetic forces or there's ultraviolet or infrared light, and we can't actually see that, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And also the fact, one sort of turning point for me was understanding that we are actually only 0.0000 something 1% matter, because if you have a look at an atom, it really is just the tiniest amount of matter surrounded by energy, and all we are is a collection of atoms. So we're actually much more energy than atoms, yet we see, or energy than matter, and all we see is the matter. So what's the other 99.99999% of us actually doing at one state at any point in time? And how do we make sense of that? How is that energy being expressed? Is there an intelligence within that? Is that affecting us more than we think? Or are we simply just a collection of this little matter that we see, including the brain? It's not just like a glob. There's a lot more to it than simple collection of cells. Okay, so that addresses, anyway, my own thoughts around developing spirituality, and that does become more important for people, and it's not really part of typical mental health, and it should be probably. Okay, so how else do we bridge the gap between mental health and optimization? One of the best or most important concepts that I think should be talked about more, and I talk about it quite regularly, is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And for those who haven't seen it, it's that hierarchy or pyramid of needs that starts really at the bottom with safety or physiological needs, and it increases up to the peak of the pyramid, which is really self-actualization. And as you work your way up from basic needs such as, food, shelter, safety, you have more psychological needs fulfilled after that, such as love or spirituality. But at the very top is self-actualization. So we can look at that, and I guess curing a mental health condition tends to be something that affects our basic thinking. But once we get on top of that, then we access even more and more higher levels of thinking. Now, even if you have a mental health condition, you can certainly reach self-actualization. That's not what I mean at all, that you can't. Self-actualization really doesn't have a whole lot to do with mental health conditions, particularly when we don't know what's causing them. Self-actualization really is living out your deepest desires and true calling. And that's where I think the epitome of life optimization or enhancement is. That's what we're trying to do, is define what is our highest self or highest calling or our deepest goals. One thing that is really important that I believe is this, if you want to transcend or push up towards the top of this pyramid, is the idea of openness. Without being open to what's possible in your life, or that maybe there's more than what your current life offers you, or that you have the option of ascending this pyramid, you really need to be open to possibilities. It's very difficult to control what's going to happen in your life, but remaining open to possibilities and what might actually be possible is really important. But at the same time, if you know you've got a deep calling to whatever it is, be a musician, be a bodybuilder, be an author, if you know that you just want an amazing family, whatever it is, if you know that, then it is really important to hold on to that. But I think often people don't necessarily know what they want. And that's when it's important to remain open and keep thinking about what it is that really pulls you, gives you that sense of aliveness. And another personal anecdote around that, I had no idea that I would be living a lot of my time in Bali. I was a little bit burnt out doing a hospital job and decided that I would just give a yoga teacher training a try because it sounded like an excellent broadening experience. So I did that in Bali because I had a few connections here and knew people that had done it, and something that drew me towards it. I can't even explain what it was. And after that, it was opening and had all these great experiences and realized, oh, maybe I could try living in Bali more of the time. There was a good community here. I liked the culture. It was interesting. There's a lot of things that I enjoyed, the tropical lifestyle and all the nature. It was pretty cool. But before that, I'd had sort of negative experiences thinking about, say, I thought there was just, where Australians go to drink, or it was like, kind of unclean in some ways. And, some of those things can be true, but also there's no perfect place. And when I was here, I really loved it. And I tried out living here some of the time and made it work. And so here I am, like I live here most of the time. And if I hadn't remained open to that experience, I would never have done this. And I feel like that's really elevated my life in many ways. So I just want to talk about some specific focuses or themes for thinking about enhancement and optimization in the context of mental health, because as I said, they really overlap. This is just something I've been thinking about, and obviously I have a lot of experience in mental health and increasingly in myself and life optimization or enhancement. So this is bringing some of that together. First of all, I would say essential element of spirituality is to remain open. So remain open to the unknown, to what might be possible in your life, that there might be growth that you're not aware of, or some sort of struggle that you're going through right now has a bigger purpose and will actually help you elevate to another level in life, so to speak. So I really encourage embracing a mindset that invites exploration and understanding beyond the tangible. The next bit is just a reminder of mastering the basics. So there is a certain level of body maintenance that we need to do that becomes important no matter in the domain of mental health or enhancement, focusing on things like sleep and nutrition and exercise and having a decent social life is good examples of things that are really important. That's going to help whatever you do in life. It's almost like the building blocks of a good life, and getting into these routines, it can be little bits at a time, is really important. You can't really reach, there are exceptions, but you can't really reach those higher levels of life without incorporating these really basic principles. It's almost like, what are you doing to maintain and create the optimal environment for your brain to really reach higher, and yourself to reach higher levels in life? The next one is really having a focus on personal growth. Some people kind of forget about it, and it's something that you need to create time and be intentional about, but it's not something to shy away from. So it is unique to each individual, but having this growth mindset where you're leaning into things that help you become a better person, whether it's passions or skills or relational ideas or something that really feels like you're improving as a person instead of stagnating. So getting out of those negative cycles where you're not feeling like you've got time to grow and become a better person. And when you do that, things often will really open up for you. And what I would add is that growth is really, again, a very personal thing. And really that's understanding what you really value and what's most authentic to you. So leaning into those things that feel most important to you and spending time on that instead of what perhaps other people's or society's ideas of how you should be spending your time are. I also think seeking broadening experiences and outside help is really important. So you can't just do this by yourself. You can force yourself to get outside of your comfort zone. So whether that's traveling or doing a new experience or reading a book you wouldn't normally read, this kind of thing is from yourself, but you are putting yourself into a situation that forces growth. It's really important. And getting outside perspectives for things like, mentors or therapists, etc., is really important. People often see things that you can't see yourself. And in the case of therapy, particularly psychodynamic therapy, you will never be able to see what's unconscious. So by definition, the unconscious remains unconscious unless you have some sort of mechanism to bring that into perspective. So someone pointing that out, arguably safe psychedelic experiences can also do that. But this is really like a hack, so to speak, that getting outside perspectives can really speed up your development to a better life. And it's probably a type of investment. We think of investing our money, but investing in really good help is going to broaden every part of your life and improve every part of your life. So I really recommend this. Another thing is cultivating resilience and adaptability. So things are always going to be challenging. We're always going to have to face difficult times in our life and difficult situations and difficult people. And finding ways to get through that or to cope with that are really important. So if you have difficulty just being with yourself or getting through a crisis, it's really important to think about how one can do that. Now, for myself, the most important thing has been tolerating negative emotions. And this is something I did develop through therapy, arguably, and meditation. But when we can't tolerate a negative experience, then our brain is sort of in a state of dysfunction. We get into a fight or fright response, and our frontal lobes switch off, and we can't really recover or grow from that as much as we'd like. But if we're able to tolerate that and zoom out from that, see that there's more to life than this specific stressor, we can often become more resilient, and particularly when we're able to focus on these things and get help from certain people. So developing this concept of resiliency and adaptability, particularly adaptability to change, is really important. And some specific ways that you can do that is through types of self-talk. So a lot of people get themselves in negative spirals by speaking negatively to themselves. If something happens to them, they blame themselves. And in speaking and creating that, like I did that to myself, or why are you such an idiot, doesn't really help you get out of that negative state of mind. So that practice of being mindful of your thoughts and then reframing in a positive light is just one little thing that I'd mention is really important here. Along this line, also, the importance of community and connection is key. So knowing who's around you, connecting yourself to community, and making sure that you get out of the house and develop these strong relationships. Of course, there's that quite famous Harvard study that showed your level of happiness. The biggest factor that determines your level of happiness is the quality of your relationships. And I think the number of relationships too. But most importantly is when you have at least several really good quality relationships that you can call upon to in times of need, or to discuss things, or to develop as a person. It's super important to growth, and it's super important to your happiness. And that really is going to be a huge thing in life enhancement. So don't neglect that. Don't just spend your time in books or therapy. I mean, that's kind of a pseudo community, but when you devote yourself to those people around you and spending time with them, it's super important to improving yourself as a person. So please invest in that. In case you haven't noticed by now, I think that broadening this perspective of mental health to life enhancement in all sorts of ways, and focusing on individual goals for how you want to improve your life, is really important. And I think, as a side note to psychiatrists or psychologists, if we're not doing this already, I think part of our understanding of people of formulation should go way beyond the simple things of how do we make this mental health condition better. And in fact, if we focus on greater goals, it can really help people get through really difficult times, including illnesses, and it can help people find purpose when times are tough. I really believe in the value of looking really broadly and helping people as individuals what it is that they really want to do in life. So that's my call to action there. I would encourage you to explore what mental health means for you and what optimization means for you. If you were to live your best life, if you were to find the self that you seek, or live the self that you seek, what is it that you would be focusing on? What is it that you would be spending your time on right now? And the more that you can spend a little bit of time contemplating that, even if it's a couple of minutes a day or a little journal, the more you are going to tip the balance towards that life that you really want. Some people would also say, well, I think it's kind of indisputable actually, but focusing on gratitude for what you already have is a very powerful shift as well. And arguably, having gratitude for what you might be able to have in the future often is associated with bringing, this is not evidence-based, but anecdotally and of course spiritually, if you focus on gratitude for what you might have or might have opportunity for in the future, then you're kind of priming your brain for that experience to happen. And then, of course, reinforcing that gratitude, which also is very directly related to happiness. So just to recap, mental health is really just a spectrum that moves from maintaining stability to achieving empowerment and fulfillment. And that is a really personal goal. I wish you well on that journey. If you are interested, I would love to hear your comments and whatever platform you're listening to this around what empowerment or mental health means to you. And if you have any particular strategies that have worked for you that other listeners can benefit from, please do share them. It's wonderful to hear them. And I'm always keeping my eyes and ears open to understand what works for people. And, you can think of that from a very specific level to a very meta level, from little tips and tricks to also the way you view the world. There are also some of the previous episodes talk about ways that you can change, talking about therapy or psychedelic or radical or incremental change. And also some of the wonderful guests that I've had on have lived really inspiring stories themselves. So I would encourage you to check out those episodes as well. Again, thanks for tuning in. I hope this has provided some benefit to you. And I look forward to talking to you next time. And please do get in contact if you want to discuss these things more. Thanks for tuning in to The Self You Seek. I hope today's episode brought you one step closer to unlocking your full potential. If you found value in this conversation, I'd love it if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Your feedback helps us grow and reach more people on their journey to self-actualization and mental optimization. And remember, this podcast is just the beginning. It's meant to inspire and empower you, but it's no substitute for personalized advice. If you ever need guidance, always reach out to a licensed healthcare or mental health professional who can support you on your unique path. Until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, and take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next episode.